Yeah, I mean, it's such like it's kind of one of those things where you get the apocalypse is coming now, and the machines are going to take over all work. And like, this is not just, the like, Uber's going to replace the driver with the driverless car. Like, I mean, I hear the stories like the radiologist is going to get replaced by the algorithm.
Sure.
Like we're talking about like lots of levels.
I went to a restaurant the other day, and every single table had an iPad on it.
Yeah.
Where if you wanted to, they still had servers, but if you wanted to, you could order from the iPad, you could pay out at the iPad. And they had games for like children to like play if they wanted. And I was pretty blown away. That's the first time I've ever seen it where it was at every single table. And I was like, well, this is, I mean, the start.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that, like, you are seeing that in different forms, and you probably will continue to see it. I feel very mixed about it. I worry about like the apocalypse kind of narrative because it just like it's too fear based versus to me I'm like, let's be strategic and preemptive. And that's where to me, like the example of like, people working like through apps, like, you could have done the exact same thing and like lifted up work for taxi drivers, who didn't have the best working conditions, but, give it to an industry and let's upgrade it and like, let's do something better with it, versus creating like a totally different, like competing workforce with like, just, kind of other levels of like miserable working conditions. So for me, it's like thinking about technology that way, like let's like someone said this recently where it's like technology in itself is not bad. Like it's a neutral thing, but it's kind of like the policy making and the decisions and the way we're going to work on this. Like Stephen Hawkings wrote this thing where he's like, technology could be great. People work 20-hour days, like 20-hour weeks. Like, let's do that. Why are we having people working, 2 jobs? One of them can be taken over by technology and the other you can still work. And then you have time for your family. But the only way that's going to work is not that you use technology to like just lower the wages or, like the folks who remain don't earn,
or just getting rid of jobs.
Or just getting rid of jobs, versus like thinking about like, I mean, it always goes like, let's bring like, what kind of like world and community do we want to build for the future? Why not, reduce the amount of time that people are going to work and, pay them better? There's also...
my question would be, how would that work for, because one of the ideas is that people are being replaced with technology because it's cheaper. So how would that work if they were paying their employees more to make up for the hours they're no longer working and also paying for the technology?
So because we are largely like still talking about capitalism, is that we make things and we need people to buy things. Right?
True. Right.
So at the end of the day, like even if people were to stop working, you still need them to be able, like the economy will only work if people are buying things. And I think like you can think about spreading the wealth in this way where, less people, like more people are working for less hours and still making a decent wage. I think that's very possible. I'm not an economist.
I was going to say,
so I didn't crunch the numbers.
Has that been tried?
I mean, there's something that there's something called universal basic income that has been kind of being floated around, and they're trying it in Europe and they're trying it in Stockton, California. And the idea is like people will work and then you'll get like $1,000 a month. Everyone. And like, why don't we think about that? Like I had someone from the taxi world talk about like, well, if you're going to displace a workforce with automated cars, like, why don't we cut up the fare so that like, a third of the fare goes to the city, a third of the fare goes to some kind of driver retraining program. so that they get skilled up to do something else. And then a third of the affair goes to the company. Like, let's think about it that way. And that's, again, like, bringing in like a little bit of regulation, bringing in a little bit of, but like allowing for that and not being so afraid of that, because we're talking about, like, sometimes I'm like, oh, I sound socialist because I'm like, we're talking about redistributing. But to me, I'm like, we're talking about like building like an economy that everybody can be a part of, rather than thinking about like, you're out and so we're just gonna leave you. And you see a lot of that, like when you hear the stories of like the opioids and folks who have been out of work, that there's like no sense of like meaning. Like, let's think about it differently. Like, what about, making sure that, like every time there's like been industrial revolutions and jobs have gotten displaced, new jobs have also gotten are also created, so like thinking about all these pieces together, rather than like an annihilation kind of narrative. Like like 20 years ago, I don't know that there were so many yoga teachers or like dog walkers in the way that there are today. Nail salons,
life coaches.
Yeah. So there's work, and I don't know if there was this person, Thomas Piketty from France, and he wrote this book called Capital in the 21st Century, and it caused all these waves because he was basically kind of just put the data out there in terms of like this golden age and how we're probably going to go back to this, like some of our worst income inequality that was, during the feudal age kind of thing. He's like, that's the track we're on. And like, I'm like, let's not be on that track. He has this stat where he says that, and you've probably heard some version of this, especially during the 1% conversation, like the Occupy stuff, which is 10% of and this is U.S., of, the most wealthiest folks own 70% of the wealth. So the other 40% is the middle class. They own about 25% of the wealth. And then the remaining 50% have 5%.
Yeah.
Like, why?
Yeah.
Like, why does it have to, why does that equation look that way?
Right. Have they looked into, I guess, the output that these people have put out? Because that's something I've heard too with like the what would you say, the top 1% owns the, what is it? The majority of the wealth. But then I also heard that they also looked into how many jobs they created, how much production they put out there. I don't know the exact numbers, but I heard that that's kind of like the counter to that.
Yeah, that's like part of the 70s to 80s to today was kind of the Reagan trickle down, is if you invest at the top, it comes down, and that's totally been debunked.
Has it?
Because we have the largest amount of income inequality ever. Like, it was actually when you spread it around that there was a lot more equality in our society. Like, one of the things that Piketty talks about is, like, when you take wealth and income, like, most folks who have income spend it. So they're contributing to the economy. So if you give, like, especially that 50% that at the bottom, if you give them, the reason why they don't have wealth is because they can't, because they're spending their money. So they're spending, and they're actually the ones that are stimulating the economy. If you take that top 10% that have that 70% of wealth, you know what they're doing with their money? They're spending some of it, but most of it they're investing. And what is investing? It's taking the wealth and charging interest on it. So they're, when there's that whole thing that the rich get richer, like, it's like literally, so like that's, people with income versus people with wealth. And that wealth doesn't come back down. And it's actually at the cost of, like, a lot of low-income folks that have, that are consuming, but, like, don't have any of that safety net.
What's preventing people with lower incomes from investing also, even just a little bit?
They don't have it. Like, you're barely, like most folks, like, and to say that 50% only have 5% of the wealth is, like, most people, like, if you're saving 5%. The rest you're spending. Like, it used to be that you should only spend a third of your income on rent. Like, if you look at the numbers in LA, it's like most people are spending half, like just for rent. And I think like now with the cost rising even further, like it's probably gonna get even worse. Educational costs are the most, like the only thing that's still cheap are like goods, which is totally based on like low wage labor. But most everything else.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.